Ukaidan le tosa kasakabu. Ukaidan wo do abang ashukuta aswanalo. Wo yeyu noma ahiare, noma abinaka, noma areja, noma adakara, noma akayata lang ka ukowa okaka mayowakan, noma urake arientagi, anai wa adahi luku wa hebeno, kena wa tekinano. Wo ahudo hahomse, biaka abano, ubura wo kena ka abano oma, wo yaha ukaidan. Bia o wakani ka hikikoa idia tosa ka abano warikoni abulia arikawa ka uma. Hiana ni bikidano kena adahi kalata. Wahianiwa akalihano wo asurula wa ekawano. Asurulani akanawano tan yokahukui ayurida wasao. Wahianiwa le mutakan bia wa ahutawakui a ashika hai alika wo do. Wahianiwa le aba anahawa o kena aba ahiuha a wawashine. Tura akehano wo manshihi. Ke wo anika tura.
Miyari, hola, hello. Tairile, ra, Jikotea, Niaku'no, Ruiz, León. Tatrahaaba, Taíno, Boricua, Ikurupuhua, Kena, Tequina, Dakebia, Alu, Umacao, Boriquén. So hello, my name is Ra. I am a Taíno Boricua artist and educator, and I live in Humacao, Boriquén. This is Taíno Voices. This is a gathering that we do monthly, always at the beginning of the month. And the point of Taíno Voices is to showcase the diversity of creativity that exists within our community. So if this is your first time, Manawa, welcome, bienvenidos. And if you join us every month, then thank you so much, Ariko Mabu Hahom, for continuing to come to Areto. As I said, I am an artist, I'm an educator, I'm Kiwari queer, I'm a vegan, I do animal rights work. I'm a founder and director of Wuru Tekiro'uo. I believe in collective liberation, which includes non-human animal liberation and respect for the planet and the abolition of oppression, exploitation, suppression for all living people and living beings. I'm an enrolled tribal member of Hiwayawa. I'm a member of the Hiwatahia Taíno language team. I teach Taíno language. I make music in Hiwatahia Taíno language, which you can find on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and different streaming platforms. I teach a class called Intro to Taíno History, Language, and Culture, which will be happening between like November and December, if you're interested in that. I lead this Taíno Voices, and I also lead Kiwari Taíno Huikino, Queer Taíno Voices, and the recordings of those panel discussions are on my YouTube channel, which is that video that you just saw. That's also on my YouTube channel, which is Ruiz, León. And that video was actually a poem that I submitted to PEN International for Mother Language, International Mother Language Day, and it was accepted, and they made that really nice video. And so another thing that I lead is the Nava Taíno Poetry Workshop, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a poetry workshop for Taíno people, specifically people who've been studying the language. In terms of what is Wuru Taíno Tekiro'uo, an initiative that we have started, that Wuru Taíno Tekiro'uo promotes and celebrates Taíno language and culture. It was started by me and also Dr. Gladys Yacely Aponte, who you will be hearing from tonight. She's an anti-colonial educator and researcher, and also happens to be my partner. And as I said, Wuru Taíno promotes and celebrates Taíno language and culture through workshops, through presentations, through community gatherings, language classes, and things like that. You can learn about Wuru Taíno Tekiro'uo by checking us out on social media, on IG at Wuru Taíno, or checking out our webpage, which is on my website, raruizleon.com. And we just had the Kiwari Taíno Huikino or Queer Taíno Voices panel discussion. The recording of that is on my YouTube channel, as I think I mentioned that before. And that was in honor of or to celebrate Pride Month in June. Something else that I'm really excited about is that we have 2 new folks on our team. They are our Wuru Taíno Tekiro'uo youth apprentices, and they'll be doing work with us this summer as well as learning leadership skills. They're part of the Beginner 1 language class, and yeah, they're doing really awesome stuff. So I'm actually going to give them a chance. They're here tonight, and I'm actually going to give them a chance to introduce themselves. So I think we'll start with Rosa. So Rosa can introduce herself to you all. ¿Dónde está Rosa? Rosa, are you still there? Can you hear us?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me? I'm sorry, my thing was acting up.
Yeah, go ahead. You can introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Miyari. Da irile Rosa, da Taíno eweyono do waria borinken. Da kebia alu lenapi hoking. Hi, my name is Rosa. My Taíno ancestors are from Borinquen, and I currently reside in Lenape Hokkien territory.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Luna got kicked out for a second out of Zoom, but I think Luna just hopped back in. And so Luna, we were just doing the introductions.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I got kicked out. My internet has been acting really weird lately. My name is Luna, and my Taíno ancestors are from Boriken, and I live in Seattle.
Thank you. So you're gonna hear more from them in a little while. If you'd like to donate to us, to Wuru Taíno, for either Areito or Kiwari Taíno Voices, or Taíno Voices, this show, or the Kiwari Taíno Voices, or any of these free offerings, you can do so. We really appreciate it through Venmo or PayPal, through our GoFundMe. If you need the information for those things, because you're like, yes, I want to donate or I want to support, you can reach out to me, or maybe Yacely later can put it in the chat. So we've started our Taíno language classes. The next cycle will start at the end of August. These are some Taíno language resources that I like to share. And you can find them on my social media. This post, it has a list of Taíno language books. This is the Hiwatahia Taíno language dictionary. It's perhaps the thickest one. It's the 2nd edition. And if you're interested in purchasing this, you can do so by emailing Cacique Jorge Esteves Baracutai at this email that's here on the screen, which is higuayawa2016@gmail.com. And if you can't get it right now, then you can reach me on through email or through social media, and I can pass it along to you. Okay, so we're going to be talking today about language, decolonizing our language mindset, decolonizing bilingual education. But before I let Yacely speak, I have a little presentation just to contextualize the things we're going to talk about, the things that we're going to hear, to give us a little bit of cultural context and historical context. The first thing I want to mention is that the Reencuentro Taíno Conference is on the UNESCO International Decade of Indigenous Languages website, which is a really big deal. And it's all thanks to the hard work of Priscila Colon from Casa Areito. So that's up there on the internet if you want to check it out. And then here, I want us to sort of think about this. I'm going to make us work a little bit before I continue. If I say the words hamaca or hamaca, barbacoa, tiburón, what language do you think people think this is? Right now, you can answer in the chat, or you can just think about it. And what about if I say the words hammock, barbecue, manatee, iguana? What language do you think people think these words are in? Now, if you said, I don't know, I don't see any answers in the chat, but if you said Spanish or English, Castellano, which is the original name of Spanish, I want you to take that and put it on the shelf for now, because we're gonna sort of come full circle to this question. So Taíno people are the indigenous to these Caribbean islands, what is now known as Cuba, Haiti, Quisqueya, also known as Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Jamaica or Jamaica, Boriquén, also known by its colonial name Puerto Rico, and other smaller islands in the surrounding area. Did our ancestors call themselves Taíno? No. This is a word that is Taíno, that is Arawak, that we use today to identify ourselves, but were our ancestors walking around throughout the different Caribbean islands, calling themselves Taíno, being like, hey, are you Taíno? I'm Taíno. Like, no, that's not how it went down. But we're living in a different time, and this is how we identify ourselves. Taíno people or indigenous Caribbean people of these islands came to be in these islands through waves of migrations. This is something I talk about in my Intro to Taíno History, Language, and Culture class, and we go more depth into this, into those migrations and where they were coming from. But these maps sort of give you an idea. They were coming from different places in what we know to be, the Amazon forest, the coast of what is now Venezuela, Colombia, Guatemala, from the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. And so all of these migrations that happens over a long period of time, these people settling into the Caribbean, they were bringing their languages, their cultures, their ways of being, their foods, their spirituality, their medicine knowledge. And that gave way to what became Taíno people, Taíno culture, Taíno language varieties, because although there was a tongue that people could understand throughout these islands in the Caribbean, there were also varieties specific to the islands. So already our indigenous Caribbean ancestors were already a mix of diverse groups and diverse cultures. And now there's an archaeologist, his name is Dr. Reniel Rodriguez Ramos. He's doing really awesome work. He talks about the diversity that already existed in the Caribbean because of these different migrations from different places and what then became what we know now as Taíno culture and language. But he's also studying these rocks that were found here in Boriquén that have sort of what seems to be writing on them. And this is really exciting work, and that goes to show the extensiveness and the richness of our culture then and now. But in 1492, colonization begins here in the Caribbean with the arrival of Christopher Columbus. And this hits a really hard blow to our culture, our civilization. Now, civilization can continue to grow and evolve and change with the times, but when colonization hits it, it's almost like getting stuck in a certain moment, right? And so this is a really important thing to talk about and to acknowledge when we're talking about Taíno history, language, and culture, and given the work that we're trying to do now to reclaim our culture, to reclaim our language. Nonetheless, we survived, even though parts of our culture, our language, our music, our spirituality were decimated and were affected in a really negative way. We survived. And we have still parts of our language, our culture, our spirituality, and we're reclaiming that more and more now, especially now with our Taíno language revitalization and reclamation work. And we have these dictionaries, we have classes and things like that. So there's all this work being done. Now, it's important to take a step from this and look at something that's been happening in our communities, and not just for us as Taíno people, but some terms that are being used throughout different indigenous communities in what is known as Abya Yala, or by its colonial name, Latino America. So when the Romans arrived here in the Iberian Peninsula in about I think it was 2018 BC. The Roman conquered the Iberian Peninsula, and they named it Hispania, which later became España, and now in English we say Spain, okay? And people from there are known as Hispanos, Hispanas, Hispanics. So I want you to just know that and put that on the shelf, because we're talking about all these terms that are used to label indigenous people, and it kind of makes no sense, right? So this is Hispania, and people from there are known as Hispano or Hispanics. Then you have the Latin language, which comes from in Italy, And these languages are born from this language family. We have Portuguese, Spanish, Romanian, Italian, French. And people who are of European descent who speak these languages were known as Latinos or Latinas, right? This man, this portrait up here that you see that I'm trying to circle, that is Americus Vespucci, who was an Italian colonizer. And this man here at the bottom, that's a portrait of Napoleon III from France. And he was one of the people who coined Latin America as a name for Abya Yala, for these indigenous lands that are known as, Central, South America. And so here's this European person naming these lands and these people by the name of Americus Vespucci in honor of him, of this colonizer, and Latin for these Latin countries who were colonizing these lands and had colonial or had colonies in these places. So it's already, if you can start to picture it, it's already a problematic thing. It's not like you are asking the indigenous people of this land, what do you want to call this land? Or what do you already call this land, right? So these are where these terms come from: Latino, Latina, Hispano, Hispana. When we say North, Central, South America, that's where those terms come from. And I wanted you to know that, because that's going to give us an important context to the conversation that then we'll hear Yacely talk about. And I have here at the bottom, understanding what these terms, where these terms came from and what they really mean is a really big part of decolonizing our language mindset, right? And that's something that we're going to be talking about today. Now, Latinidad and Hispanidad are settler colonial projects. They are an extension of white supremacy, white Christian supremacy that erased indigeneity and erased indigenous history, as well as Afro-descendant identity and history. They help to uphold the legacy of European colonization on indigenous land. Now, how many of you who maybe watch Telemundo or watch Univision, these entities that really push these ideas, these colonial and colonial settler ideas, how many of you have heard them? Have you been watching like the news or telenovelas and you hear them do a land acknowledgement? You don't, right? You don't hear them doing that. They're never going to acknowledge that they are on indigenous land, that these colonial entities and colonial empires, these places and these people that they've built their empires and their governments on indigenous land. And they're also not going to acknowledge that it's built on the enslavement of African peoples. So that's part of the colonial project of Latinidad and Hispanidad. So Latino is someone of European descent who speaks a Latin language, and Hispano is someone from España, also known as España. So all that to say that whether or not we add the E or the X at the end, we say Latine, Latinx, it's still problematic, right? So just because you make a racist term non-binary or gender inclusive or gender neutral, doesn't make that term any better, doesn't make it any that racist term or colonial term any less racist or any less colonial. And I have this little black box up here that says white Latinos, because I think it's really kind of like, it's funny and kind of ridiculous because Latino already means white. So to say white Latinos is weird. Now these are terms that I know we hear. These are identities that people have added on as badges of pride, and they walk around being like, I'm Latino. But it's dangerous. It's a dangerous thing. And I'm going to show you something. So it's dangerous on different levels. So this petroglyph up here, I immediately recognized it. I was looking something about petroglyphs in Tibes, which is a Taíno ceremonial center here in Boriquén, in the south of Boriquén, specifically in the town of Ponce, which is where I'm from. And my mom had been taking me there since I was a little kid. And so this petroglyph is there, and I was looking up something about petroglyphs for one of my classes. And as you see at the bottom, they label this page that has information about Taíno petroglyphs as Hispanic culture and rock art. There's two problematic things there, right? One, that they're calling it Hispanic when it has nothing to do with Spain. And two, that they're calling it rock art, right? They're simplifying this very sacred thing that is important to Taíno spirituality and culture as just rock art, right? So there's a danger in these terms like Latino, Hispano, and the way that they erase indigenous culture and Afro-descendancy. Now, this can get even more dangerous. I don't know if you've heard about this case of this young indigenous man in Florida. This happened in May of 2023, that was arrested. He was hanging out in front of a motel in the evening, eating a sandwich on the phone with his mom, and a white police officer approached him. And as I circled here, because he looked at, he was a suspicious Hispanic male. Right, this indigenous young man from Guatemala, he labeled him as a suspicious Hispanic male, right? So the young man doesn't speak Spanish, doesn't speak English, and so they get into a thing. It so happens that the cop has a heart attack and passes away, right? And so he was being charged for that, for killing the cop. Now, this case got a lot of attention because of how problematic it was. And one of the things that I remember reading was not only that this young man did not speak English, and so when he was interacting with the cop, he could not understand him, and he was telling him, I don't speak English. He was speaking to him in his indigenous language, ma'am, as it says here. But when they had him in custody, they brought in an interpreter or a translator who spoke Spanish, because they were just like, well, he looks Hispanic, so he must be Hispanic. And so he also couldn't communicate with the interpreter, with the translator, because he didn't speak Spanish. So there's a big danger in not interrogating these colonial racist terms of Hispano, Hispana, Hispanics, however you want to say, Latino, Latina, Latinx. Some people are doing really awesome work interrogating these things, pushing back against these things. Are Professor Silali Anahuac. She has a page called Mexican Excellence. She's a college professor at a community college in LA. She has a book called Don't Call Me Latina. It's a mix of like poetry and prose and things like that. And she has a lot of content on her YouTube channel and on her Instagram. And she's really awesome. Another person who's doing really awesome work around this is Odilia Romero. She has a really awesome TED Talk that's called Why Indigenous People Want You to Stop Labeling Them as Latino. And there's a really awesome song by rap duo Cosmic Force that's made up by these two rappers. One is Jaguar Areola, one is Native Threats. Those are their stage names. And they have a song called Lo Nuestro Nunca Muere, which means in Spanish, our things never die. That's the rough translation. And so these are some parts of the song. So I wanted to read some parts of that to you. This Cosmic Native Threat, one of his verses says, La religión católica cristiana ni este continente. So the Christian Catholic religion is not of this continent, he says. Ni esta lengua que yo escribo. Neither is this tongue or this language that I'm writing in or that I'm rapping in. Pero lo uso con el motivo de hablar con las niñas y niños. But I use it with the motive of speaking with girls and boys. And then Jaguar Areola says in his rapping, contesta mi pregunta, ¿acepta ser mestizo? Answer my question, do you accept to be mestizo? Mestizo is one of the racial categories that colonizers from Spain created. They created this chart, as you see here, of racial categories. And so that's one of the categories that they created. So he's saying, do you accept that? He says, las castas, which is what this chart was called, las castas. Las castas, el racismo, the racism, hijo bastardo de España, a bastard child of Spain, un trofeo del Vaticano y el Papa, a trophy of the Vatican and of the Pope. Jamás. So he's answering his own question. He's saying, never. I would never accept that. And then the chorus of the song says, sangre indígena en mis venas, sangre indígena en mis venas, which means indigenous blood in my veins. And he repeats that twice. No te olvides tu raíz con el maíz en la mesa. Don't forget your roots with the corn on the table. Yo no soy trofeo de los europeos. I am not a trophy of Spain. That's a song you can find on YouTube and Spotify. It's called Lo Nuestro Nunca Muere. Now, these things, colonization, like I said, it deals a really heavy blow on communities. And so it says here, historical trauma has emerged as a critical area of study in understanding and addressing long-term health problems in communities. And there are countless studies that have shown that colonial violence and stripping a community of their identity leads to depression, PTSD, trauma, community violence, mental health issues. But in the same way that these things can affect us negatively. When we do reclamation work, language revitalization work, we are doing the opposite. We are reviving ourselves, revitalizing ourselves, reclaiming ourselves. Here at the top says, since the start of settler colonization, indigenous languages have been declining in use and number of speakers. Now, that's a little bit too passive for me, because to say they've been declining as if they've just been deciding to decline, as opposed to saying they've been targeted and attacked, I think would be more appropriate. Acts of genocide, ethnocide, and assimilation play roles in this decline, including recent examples of to limit indigenous language use through policy. But again, if we work on our cultures and we work on revitalization and reclamation, we can heal and we can start building ourselves up. And it has positive outcomes in the health of not just our communities, but our own personal health. So I was looking this up, and Cambridge University Press has an article. So I want to show you just two pieces from that, just two excerpts of that article. So here it says, improved mental well-being is probably the more obvious outcome. People who actively participate in language revitalization report a better mindset and higher levels of self-esteem than before, even when they do not learn much of the language, maybe even just a few words or greetings. And the last thing here at the bottom says, language use and revitalization has emerged as protective factors in the health of indigenous populations. Benefits of language programs in tribal and other settings should be considered a cost-effective way in improving outcomes in multiple domains. And here are pictures of young Taíno kids in their Taíno regalia. I think it's really cute, so I wanted to add that there. So I hope that gave you a little bit of sort of context and fuel for this conversation, and the things that Yacely is going to talk about in terms of decolonizing our language mindset. I hope that this conversation is already a part of that, right? Decolonizing bilingual dual language education, given her experience, because that's the field that she works in. And the importance of acknowledging the contributions of Taíno language and culture to English and Spanish, and bringing Taíno language into the classroom that have Caribbean students. And now what I'm going to ask is Rosa to introduce Yacely, and I'm going to stop share because Yacely will share some slides after this.
Dr. Aponte was born and raised in NYC with parents from Quisqueya. She is a member of the Taíno community and has been learning the Hiwatahia Taíno language. She loves to cook and veganize dishes. She lives in Borinquen with her partner and their dog, Hima. Gladys is a postdoctoral research scholar at the Children Equity Project, and her work focuses on examining and distributing racist colonial beliefs about language that shape the school experiences of young bilingual children. Before pursuing a doctoral degree, Gladys was a dual language bilingual teacher in New York City public schools. She continues to work closely with teachers of multilingual students as an educational consultant, fieldwork advisor, and adjunct professor. Gladys holds a PhD in urban education from the Graduate Center, City University of New York, a master's degree in childhood bilingual and special education from Bank Street Graduate School of Education, and a BA in childhood education from CUNY Hunter College.
Miyari. Can everyone hear me? Great. I'm recovering. My voice is recovering, so hopefully it'll last for the few minutes that I want to share some things with you all. Miyari dairile Yacely, da Taíno hebellono do waria Quisqueya, da kivia alu boriken lena kena lena pehoken. I'm Yacely, and my Taíno ancestors are from Quisqueya, and currently I live between Boriquen and Lenapehoking, so known as New York City. And Quisqueya, as Ra was mentioning, I want to share my screen here. So as Ra was mentioning, Quisqueya is an indigenous name of the Dominican Republic. And what I'll be focusing in on language. So I just wanted to remind everyone that Dominicans, Quisqueyanos, aka Dominicans, are speak different varieties of Spanish currently, even though the original language of our indigenous ancestors were different Taíno variants, indigenous varieties of their indigenous language. Currently, we speak Spanish, which is a language that was forced upon us, upon our ancestors. And we speak different varieties depending on the different regions of the island and class and all of that. And the variety of Spanish that we speak are all influenced by indigenous Taíno and Africans, our African and indigenous Taíno ancestors. I always say it's, their resistance and survival is evident in our language. They're resisting to speak a language that wasn't there and that was violently forced upon them. So I'll share a bit about where I come from and who I am. I was born and raised in Lenape. My parents are from Quisqueya, as I mentioned, and I was raised by my mother and grandmother, who you see up here on the left. I went to New York City public schools, and I then became a New York City public school teacher. And here are some pictures of me teaching. I started what I would say is my decolonial journey and my consciousness. When I was a teacher, I wanted to make sure I was teaching social studies specifically in a more critical way. And I wanted to ensure that students learned about their actual history, but I didn't really know my history because I had been taught the dominant, the oppressor's version of like Taínos are extinct, et cetera, right? So about 10 years ago, I started attending Taíno workshops. I went to some sessions at the Museum of American Indian. I took sessions from the Cacique Jorge Barucate, and I also started taking language classes, as Rosita mentioned. I've been learning the Hiwatahia Taíno language, and I've been attending IRCA sessions, for example, IRCA Mateo sessions, and just really working to decolonize my own mindset. And when I was in the classroom, I also started thinking about how language is so embedded in this colonial racist project, right? I was a dual language bilingual teacher, which meant that I taught one day in English, one day in Spanish, and I didn't feel comfortable speaking the Spanish that had that African and Taíno influence in it. I had learned that I had to switch the way I spoke to speak in a more quote unquote correct way. And I had learned these things from many things, like Univision, like where I was mentioning, from the novelas, who, people that look like me were either a parody, like La India Maria, or sirvientas, right? Any Black and brown person in the novelas were never the protagonistas. They were always the marginalized, oppressed people. And they always spoke in a way that was funny, right? So these are all things that we learn implicitly, what I call the hidden curriculum now that I work with teachers, things that we learn from society in implicit ways and not so implicit ways, and sometimes not really through microaggressions, but sometimes just so. So most recently, I wrote a dissertation on this. I wrote a dissertation on language ideologies and how children in bilingual programs navigate oppressive language ideologies that exist in our society. I know Ra wanted me to explain a bit about what language ideologies are. And they're basically beliefs that we have about language. So any beliefs that we have about language, which are usually people's beliefs about language, if we stop and think about our own beliefs about language, they're usually shaped by dominant perspectives about what's considered better or correct. And when I say dominant, I mean oppressive, racist, colonial perspectives, right? Things that we are learned, we are taught because for many generations, these are ideas that have been formed in us. So one example is if we think about language varieties, there are many, for example, there are hierarchies that are created in society about different ways that people speak certain languages. So there's these ideas of like what is correct English, what's informal or improper English, and what English should be used in quote unquote professional settings, right? Same thing with all languages, such as like Spanish, what's considered correct Spanish. These one of the common ideologies around Spanish is that Colombians speak better Spanish, the Dominicans speak bad Spanish, right? So there's these hierarchies that exist among languages, and these are all language ideologies. And in reality, there's no language variety that's inherently better or standard. Some varieties have been standardized based on the language practices of those historically in power, but none are intrinsically standard just because, right? They're ones that society, governments, policies, and individuals standardize. They make us believe that they're the standard. And they're always shaped by how close you are, the proximity to the colonizer, right? Where it would be the closer you speak to the oppressor, to the colonizer, the more it's perceived as the ideal and the neutral and correct way of speaking. And it's important to remember that language is ever changing. It's always evolving, and it always evolves according to how people speak. So in reality, no variety is pure, because sometimes people say, well, the correct Spanish, for example, is from Madrid because it's the most pure. But for one, that variety has evolved, and it's a mixture of many different varieties and languages that have come together over the year. Just as it is in the Dominican Republic. But why is one seen as better than the other? Because of racist beliefs, racist ideologies, and colonial beliefs, right? So that's just a little overview of language ideologies. And it's important to remember to point out that oppressive language ideologies have real consequences and repercussion for people. And throughout history, they have had these repercussions. So they've excluded groups from public discourse, from education, from employment opportunities, right? We're judged based on the way we speak. We have to, learn these dominant ways of speaking in order to succeed in capitalist, white supremacist society. And these oppressive ideologies harm individuals in emotional, psychological, social, material ways. And in this little box, I just point out some of the ways that policies have done that through schooling, the history of schooling, which is what I focus on, right? So we can look at Indian boarding schools, for example, which what they targeted first was, cutting the hair and the tongue, right? Making sure that the children stopped speaking their indigenous language because they knew how dangerous it was, because our language is our identity. And then we had like English only education policies that forbade the teaching of any other language in school, and kids were hit for speaking any other language in schools. Same with the banning of quote unquote Ebonics or African American English in schools. And now we can see this as well with school accountability systems that aim to close the achievement gap, the quote unquote achievement gap, which is really an opportunity gap, by measuring standards based on white cultural and linguistic standards. So measuring student success based on how well they can perform white dominant linguistic standards. How do they speak? How can they pass this test? That's, they must understand this way of speaking. So these are all ways that language ideologies continue to harm us. So what I wanted to share an example of one student who I interviewed for my dissertation. I interviewed fourth graders, and I asked them many questions, and I observed them in the classroom. And what I noticed is that a lot of them had internalized deficit ways of seeing our Spanish that has so much Taíno and African influence, right? Here's a quote from Jonathan, who's an 8-year-old student who was born in Santo Domingo, and he says, nosotros los dominicanos hablamos feo. Mi bisabuela y mi abuela hablan bien feo, hablan como gente de campo. So here you can see Jonathan has really internalized these ideas that his loved ones who actually raised him, his abuela and his bisabuela who raised him, he's learned to see their language practices as ugly, right? As inferior and deficient. And this was a common thread amongst all the children that I interviewed, the Quisqueyana children that I interviewed. And I wasn't surprised because this is something that is very common. And it's actually what drove me to this research, is because I myself had internalized these ideas. And because I work with teachers now at the university level, either teachers that want to be teachers, prospective teachers, or teachers who are already teachers and want an extension to be a bilingual ESL teacher. And this is something that I continue to see, right? We internalize these ideas that we have to speak a certain way, we have to fix the way we speak, and we don't really celebrate and recognize the rich diversity in our language, in our language varieties. So as I pointed out earlier, I like to remind folks that I work with, teachers and the children, that the language that seems so wrong to so many is a beautiful, creative language of resistance and remembrance. That the way that we speak is a reflection of our Taíno and African ancestors' resistance and survival. Our ancestors were violently forced to speak this Spanish, this language that's not ours, right? And they kept some of their African features, some of their Taíno words and accents and just way of saying things, in addition to our culture and all the indigenous knowledges that exist in our cultures, right? You can also see that resistance and their survival in our language through our tongues, right? When we speak, and it's super important to recognize. But moving away from that colonial language, from Spanish, right? The question is now, how do we further decolonize schools, right? Yes, we should validate, all varieties of languages, but then we're still speaking this colonizer language, right? So where do we go from here? And I know Ra had some questions about this. I don't know if you wanted to chime in now, Ra.
Yeah, let me spotlight myself. Actually, I can't find myself. I'm gonna remove. There you go, you found me. Yeah, so for me, I wanted to ask you, as somebody who works inside of schools, is how can we, one, have schools acknowledge, right? In the beginning, my question to everyone was these words that I showed, right? Like hamaca, barbacoa, hammock, barbecue, manatee, iguana, words like that. I think that it'd be powerful if in schools, kids learned where these words come from. And they learned, that would be an opportunity to learn about Taíno people, to learn about Taíno culture, because most likely that's not happening, right? So that's at least for me, that's how I think that conversation can start. And then we can take it a step further and start introducing Taíno language into schools, specifically to schools that have a large population of Caribbean students, so that it is culturally relevant to them. And maybe you can talk about this, about how powerful it is for a young person to see themselves reflected in the curriculum or in the material. And I know you do that kind of work with teachers on how to create, I know what you call culturally sustaining classrooms. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I actually want to share. I think it's the next slide. Yeah. So some of the things I center in my work with teachers. I teach at City College, at Bank Street College, at Brooklyn College. And in any course that I teach, I remind teachers that all teachers are teachers of language, regardless if you're a math teacher, a science teacher, social studies teacher, if you're just teaching one of the content areas, you're a teacher of language because you need language to learn, right? And the most important thing is that you really validate, celebrate, and build on students' identities. And I mean, their complete identities, not just what they know in English, but who they are entirely, what culture they're bringing in, what language they're bringing in. And we call this creating a translanguaging classroom. And translanguaging just means speaking and just languaging in a free way where you really use all of your linguistic repertoire, all the language you know, without being watchful of like how am I being judged, what's appropriate here, what's considered correct or prestigious English or Spanish, or right. And we do this as a way to empower historically marginalized children and to dismantle those linguistic hierarchies in school, right? So at the bottom here, you can see this is a mural in Jackson Heights, Queens that I actually painted in collaboration with El Museo del Barrio. And my students decided that they wanted, because I had created this translanguaging classroom, the students decided that they wanted a lot of the languages in the neighborhood to be represented in the mural. So you can see that there, right? So that's part of this idea of creating a translanguaging classroom. But also I talk about with teachers, we talk about the importance of really knowing where language ideologies come from and unpacking their own language ideologies, right? Like in the beginning of most of my classes, I have teachers do a language story. And this language story is really them unpacking with just some guiding questions, unpacking the way that they learned language and what language varieties they speak and what languages they speak and why, right? And it's a way of disrupting their ideologies and to interrogate how they ended up speaking the way that they speak, to interrogate the varieties that they speak and to think about why they perhaps don't speak their indigenous languages, and to really unpack that history, right? That we don't get to really unpack from kindergarten to 12th grade. So I want to make sure they're getting to do that before they go into the classrooms and can build classrooms that are more anti-racist and decolonial. And then the teachers also have to listen to each other's language stories and respond to them. So they get to see other people's perspectives and their stories. Excuse me. So I think that, excuse me, things like that are super important. And when I think about incorporating more indigenous language into the classroom, I think of simple things. I think teachers always need very simple starters. And for one is recognizing that, first of all, a lot of our languages already have so many indigenous words, like you mentioned, right? So even pointing that out, like we really need to point out to kids, like the varieties that we speak are different because of our indigenous influences, right? And what words are there that are already Taíno, but also incorporating different greetings, for example, and different words throughout the days and with families and friends, and getting students excited to learn and to use their indigenous languages. So here's an example of one strategy I used in the classroom, and this was when I taught in Sunnyside, Queens, and these were all the languages in the room. And you can see here, all we did was that for the first 5 minutes, we said good morning in each of the students' languages. And it makes such a big difference to create a multilingual environment where all the languages are celebrated and validated and brought in, right? And it makes such a big difference. For example, the little girl to the bottom right, she's from the south of India, and she's like, no one ever asked me what language I speak. No one ever cared to learn Gujarati. They think everyone in India speaks Hindi and that's it. And it's like such a big difference, right? And research shows that when children learn about their history and they're able to learn and use their indigenous languages, it really makes a big difference. They gain better self-esteem. a better sense of themselves. And this can happen with Taíno as well, right? I think we need to teach children their history, not just of their culture, but where our languages come from, and go beyond that, right? So it's not just like, oh, this is why Dominican Spanish is the way it is, and it's beautiful, and debunking these oppressive ideologies, but also let's learn some African phrases, let's learn some Taíno phrases, right? And I think that way we can slowly begin to decolonize and get students excited about that.
Yeah, and I think that that also opens up the appetite of the young person or even the adult student, right? It opens up the appetite to learn more. And they might want to be like, well, actually, I want to learn more phrases. And actually, I want to have a sense of fluency. And there's this Alaska Native language advocate. His name is Shune Lance Twitchell, who's doing really awesome work in Alaska. And he talks about the levels of fluency as opposed to becoming fluent. He says we shouldn't try to get to this perfect level of fluence in our indigenous language, but we should try to scale that ladder of fluency and slowly, one day at a time, just become more and more fluent, so that we're not setting ourselves up with this gigantic goal that will seem intimidating. But if you just take it one step at a time, you'll get there.
I love that. And I think it's so important to keep that perspective. And I just wanted to end. I love that you shared Cosmic Forces lyrics, because I think of Adrienne Rich, and she has a similar quote that is always a good reminder for me as I fight for bilingual education to really validate language varieties. I also remind myself that this is the oppressor's language, right? I'm fighting for schools to validate and celebrate different Spanish varieties, for example, but it's still the oppressor's language, right? As Adrienne Rich says, this is the oppressor's language that I needed to talk to you. I think it's an important reminder as I continue to ask myself the question, like, what's next? How do we continue to decolonize? And I love, having this conversation here and brainstorming together. So thank you all for listening and for having me.
Arikomabu, Yacely, Arikomabu for all the slides and the presentations. As usual, we end Taíno Voices with Taíno Trivia. And Taíno Trivia is when we ask a question and you, the audience, the people who are listening, put the correct answer in the chat. And the first person to put the correct answer is our winner for the night. So Luna is actually going to present that question, and so I'm going to share my screen so that Luna can present the question.
So since finding this Taíno community and this Taíno space to learn more about my culture and ancestors, I have found a big sense of home, a sense of family and community, and that's been really sweet to I don't know, find, because I feel like I've been lacking that most of my life. So for the trivia questions, I wanted the words to be family, home, and community. So if you know the Taíno translation, put it in the chat, or you can unmute.
So we'll give everyone a few seconds to try to answer what are the Tahiwa Tahia Taíno words for family, home, and community. And if you only know one, that's also okay. If you know two, that's fine. But if you know all three, then you've hit the jackpot. So we'll wait a few seconds before we show you the answer. Folks are probably looking in their dictionaries. Hey, no cheating. No, I'm playing. I'll wait a few more seconds. No one wants to try? Oh, let me see. Bojillo, yes, bojillo is one of those words. Home is bojillo, yeah, that's correct. I see Angel and Cristina answered. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the slide that has the answers and I'll let Luna read it.
So family is Taíno, home is Bojillo, and community is Kamecuana.
Awesome, Arikomabu, Luna, for creating those questions, that question for us for Taíno Trivia. Okay, everyone. Arikomabu for joining us tonight. I hope that this was informative, that you enjoyed it. And we hope to see you at the next Taíno Voices in August, which I'm really excited about this. So I'm glad that you stayed to the end. Luna and Rosa will be leading the entire Taíno Voices. And I'm just going to chill. I'm just going to enjoy it and watch it. So please come back next month. Other than that, Arikomabu, gracias, thank you, Jajom, for being here. Gracias a todos por estar aquí. We will see each other next month. And Usaka Sakuda. Good evening. Buenas noches. Usabutawa. And